Welcome everybody, and to our next edition of Leaders Lounge. Here today with me, we have a representative, a first actually, from the federal government. It truly is a pleasure for me to introduce you to and welcome Tom Balfour. Tom joined Fisheries and Oceans Canada in September 2015 as Director General of Human Resources. Tom's previous service was with Public Works and Government Services Canada, where he acted as Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources. He was appointed Director General, Labor Relations and Ethics, Occupational Health and Safety, Compensation and Wellbeing in January of 2014. Tom extends his commitment to the public service, serving as a member of the Board of Directors of the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, a non-profit organization that brings together managers and professionals from federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as academics and other stakeholders interested in public administration. Tom, welcome and thank you for joining me today on Leaders Lounge.
Thanks, Tony.
Tom, as has been the case, I really enjoy asking questions, and this is a first, as I've mentioned, for someone who actually works in the federal scope of things and in the federal government. So I'd like to start maybe by asking you what you've learned about your team and the future leaders within it over the past year, and has it impacted people working in the federal government differently than, I guess, what we've seen in the private sector specifically?
For sure. No, that's a really good question. And I think, first of all, I'd have to say we're so very fortunate to be public servants in this time of pandemic and crisis. We're not unaware of the impacts that there have been on so many Canadians in the private sector and elsewhere across the country. As a public servant, we continue to serve Canadians. It's very important that we do so. But individually, we're very fortunate to continue to have all the benefits of our employment. Frankly, for me, it's not been a great benefit to be able to work remotely, to be able to work from home, although it is for a lot of people who have young children, for example, or aging parents. But nonetheless, as public servants, our salary continues to roll into our account every second week. So the impacts for us personally are probably not as great. Professionally, I think that's another question altogether.
Yeah. So then, speaking to that, have you had to make some trade-offs or compromises as a result of the pandemic? And if so, what were they? And can you talk us through how you made those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where I think I was going with that answer, was to say what's been different for us is, it's extremely challenging. The employer, the Treasury Board Secretary, who's the employer for the Federal Public Service, said basically back in March 2020, if you can work from home, you must, please do. Different levels of government said it more explicitly than that. In Quebec, for example, it was required. So the provincial government required all Quebec public servants to work remotely if they could. So immediately flipping the switch from everybody in the office to everybody working remotely brings all kinds of challenges. Obviously, the technology needed to catch up. In my organization, we were fortunate that a lot of effort had been put in place to get us equipped to work more remotely. And so all those efforts accelerated and we were able to get up and running pretty quickly. But nonetheless, suddenly all our workforce that were usually right in front of us were all in individual locations working from their homes. My organization is extremely regionally based. So we have time zone questions as well. The connectivity challenge, where the massive employees are all trying to connect at the same time, challenging. So obviously there's some lag in that. When I'm used to being able to just walk down the hall and talk to somebody or call and have somebody come to my office, I couldn't do that anymore. Now, the flip side of that was we were also available all the time through all the different channels. I've never received so many contacts from so many different ways. So I would be getting text messages, phone calls, MS Teams messages, invitations to Zoom meetings, all kinds of different ways of connecting. And it completely blurred the timeline and the schedule that you'd be used to, the structure that we were used to before. So really, in short, Tony, I guess it's really how do you manage a team in an environment that is completely unfamiliar and that everybody's struggling through at the same time. So that's a bit of what I've alluded to, is the technology challenge. Even if I want to connect everybody at the same time, I may not be able to. And connecting everybody virtually is just not the same as brainstorming around a table, conveying information to people all at the same time and all in the same manner. So those were huge challenges for sure.
Yeah. Tom, talk to me a little bit about that, because you mentioned the number of interaction opportunities might have been limited unless they were structured. So how were you able to maintain that visibility and influence within your team and also your cohorts from around the country? Did you have standardized, structured agendas and meetings on the calendar to make sure that happened?
Yeah, so there's a lot of that for sure. I mean, as much as I'm alluding to a lot of that very punctual people calling all of whenever something happens, there really was, because we're the federal government, we really do have a hierarchy and a bureaucracy. So, we do default to that. And so, yes, a lot of new meetings were set up. There were scheduled meetings. I can tell you at the beginning of the pandemic, I had daily meetings with the senior leadership, the Deputy Minister, the Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, and others, including on Saturdays and Sundays. So every day of the week, a standing meeting was held, originally by teleconference, then virtually. So certainly in the early days, I did not suffer from a lack of visibility as the head of HR in my organization, frankly, the opposite. After that, I think, and this was a point when I was reflecting on some of the questions, Tony, is how do we remain relevant and visible is, yes, this is a crisis, and yes, it's affecting us all. But as a head of HR, we're still responsible for a lot of programming that's really important. It's critical. It's essential to our organizations. So for me, that's my default, and I can deal with the crisis. I can deal with the urgent meeting to deal with the latest thing that's happening related to the crisis. But I have to keep in mind the regular programming, keep the trains running on time. And if a meeting has not been scheduled by senior leadership, then I will request it and I will make sure that it happens. And I did really always get that attention. So it wasn't a huge challenge to maintain visibility. I think people were also eager to talk about anything that wasn't COVID related at a certain point. And people just really keep in mind, these are important things we have to keep doing. One of the ones that I was reflecting on, because we have in the federal government something called the National Public Service Week. It's a week in June every year to really celebrate the contribution of our public servants. This is the second year we've done an awards ceremony virtually, chaired by the Deputy Minister and the Commissioner of the Coast Guard, and we give out awards and we recognize contribution. And yeah, it's not the same as doing it in person, but it's still really important. And there was never any moment where we said, well, let's just skip that this year. COVID's still, running rampant. I was talking more about last year. But last year in the summer, when we would have been doing this, we still did it. We still did a lot of the things that we needed to do. We still have a lot of the same reporting requirements. We still need to recruit employees. We still need to onboard employees. We need to focus on diversity and inclusion in our workforce. And really, so it wasn't, and again, I'm fortunate that it wasn't that difficult to remain relevant in HR during that period. It was challenging because of the different channels I'm talking about, because of the noise from COVID. Just really, when you're in a crisis situation, obviously the crisis always prevails. So you just have to try a little harder, I think.
You obviously have a large team there that's working for you. So have you been able to take the pulse of your team in terms of how they felt? Did they feel that the culture was maintained, actually got stronger because of that connection? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, a lot of people said and have been saying, and particularly now as we're starting to return to the workplace, we're facing a little bit of resistance, I'll say. Maybe we were the victims a little bit too much of the success, and success is a strange word to use because of a pandemic and a global crisis, but the technology really served us well. And really, it surprised many of us. It certainly surprised our senior leadership here at DFO and the Coast Guard with how successful we were with working remotely. Team cohesion didn't seem to suffer too much. Our productivity didn't seem to suffer too much. I think it will take a bit of time to evaluate how much we lost during that period. But to focus on the positives, certainly there were gains. I think that we're a very regionally based organization, Fisheries and Oceans and the Coast Guard. My HR team is about 300 strong, probably about 200 here with me in Ottawa and the rest of them across the country. And so we're already used to working virtually to a large extent. We're used to working across time zones. For me, team cohesion is really important. It's really important for me to be able to walk the halls, to talk to people, to connect with people. And I've really missed that. I don't think that people are recognizing how much they've lost from it. Just today, I had a number of people here. And so because there were a number of people here, we just had a bit of a pizza lunch in the boardroom. And it was great to hear the voices and to hear people talking. And I did get a bit more of a pulse from my directors, from what they're hearing from their teams. And I think they just need to see more people come into the workplace and see how much is to be gained by that in-person connectivity. It's just, but I think I said it, I really do worry a little bit about what we've lost, but I don't think we'll know for a while yet. And to your question about have we asked, we've actually been doing a number of surveys recently, and we're gathering that intel, because we're trying really to prepare people for what's the workplace going to look like after COVID. We know it won't look exactly like it did before, nor will it look exactly like it did during. So what is after looking like? That hearing from everybody will be very important to that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was actually going to be my next thought around the future of work. And, are you already, do you have in mind what you think that'll look like? I know and it's great that you're surveying employees. I think that's a really positive sign. But in terms of, remote work, given that, people have been productive and demonstrated so, do you see that happening as well at your level, that you're going to utilize these tools into the future much more than ever before?
Absolutely, Tony. We absolutely will. We recognize that, overall, it's worked well. And I will say that it's not one extreme or the other is the perfect one. So we certainly now recognize that the extreme of everybody in the workplace probably wasn't the best one. And the extreme of everybody working remotely is not the best one either. We call this the hybrid option of working part-time at home and part-time in the workplace. Obviously, there are constraints to this, and that we're working through. I refer to the Treasury Board Secretariat as the employer, and so that's where we need to get some guidance as federal government departments on, what are the parameters that you can apply within your workplace. Deputy heads have a certain amount of leeway, but there are certainly we do need to follow some of the broader guidelines. That relates, as you can imagine, to collective bargaining with the different federal unions, and so there's a lot to work through on that front. The technology has facilitated this, but what does that hybrid look like? The current measures allow, so if somebody wants to work remotely, it's called telework, and the employee is requesting it. And if the employer agrees to do it, the employee sets themselves up to do it at home. Through remote work, because it was forced upon us, we said to everybody, okay, come to the office and get what you need. That included the chair, their screen, their computer, whatever they needed to work from home. Once they come back and they're working part-time at home and part-time at work, we haven't yet worked through that question. For example, what does that look like? Will you let me keep what I brought home and you'll buy me new stuff at the office? Currently, that's not possible. Will that become possible? I'm not sure. We don't have a lot of time to work this through because we're really expecting that by September, if we listen to the public health guidance we're hearing from the Public Health Agency of Canada, obviously political leadership, the Prime Minister and others, that seems to be the expectation. So we're really going to have to work that through. I will just say in short, I think to answer the question you asked was, it won't look the same as before. It won't look the same as it did during the pandemic. And I think the hybrid is the solution. And I think, frankly, that it's probably the best solution in terms of getting that productivity, but not losing the connection that we have when we're able to collaborate in person.
Right. Now, I guess as federal government employees, most of them were already there. You mentioned telework. A number had that benefit already, and they were used to working from home to some degree. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
It's always possible. I don't think, it wasn't necessarily a high percentage of employees. And I think actually, I'm really glad you asked that question, because as we reflect on this, it's thinking about how few of our employees were working remotely full-time, very few. More were working part of the time at home. But during the pandemic, the remote work that was forced upon us was pretty much everybody who had a desk job. In an operational organization like mine, when you're working on a Coast Guard vessel, you're search and rescue, you're a fisheries officer out in the field, obviously you were in your workplace, whether that was outside on a vessel or whatever. But desk jobs, That's the key to this, to the whole thing. Obviously, everybody imagines the cubicle world of the federal public servant, and it's, it is relatively true. We're moving away from it in terms of a lot of the solutions, the real property solutions. Some of it's about reducing the footprint of the federal government's buildings and leasing of buildings and workspace. But part of it's about enhancing collaboration so that when employees are around a table, they're working on a whiteboard, etc. Technology allows for some of that, but it's just really not the same. So it's getting to that sweet spot is going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, and clearly, you want to make sure that you're still leveraging that creativity, having a workforce come together and be able to debate one another in person, and using whiteboarding and having that frank discussion. That's a lot easier to happen, not through Zoom or Teams, but through in-person meetings. And I guess the big thing as well that we're hearing more and more is we certainly don't want to create two classes of employees, those that are in the office and those that are not. And those who are not, are less privileged, so to speak, because they're not with senior management. Maybe they're not attending, spontaneous events. Hey, let's go to lunch, or let's go for a beer after work. That may not be happening if you're not in the office. So HR needs to be on top of this and to ensure that the culture is maintained and not creating different classes of employees within a system, right? And we're hearing more and more of that concern as we come out of this pandemic, as you said.
Absolutely, well summarized. Yeah.
I'd like to shift now a little bit to leadership. Can you share some examples of what you think good leadership looks like during this pandemic, and what you've seen either by your peers, your colleagues, and maybe some of your employees who you deem as leaders in their own right?
Yeah, I really like that question, because to me, leadership is one of the most important things for senior manager in the government or an HR leader. I think that we use the word more in the context of HR, and rightly so. I think our support to senior management, equipping them to be the leaders they need to be, giving them the tools and support they need is really important. So for me, it's about, I don't necessarily like the expression walk the talk, and particularly walking the talk may be more of a challenge in a virtual environment, and the different channels make that a little bit more difficult. When people see you and they see how you operate, and they see the way that we interact with our staff, with our peers, with senior leadership, those are examples to our staff as well. Examples what not to do as well as what to do. And so when you're working remotely in your home all by yourself and you're connecting to meetings from time to time, it's just not the same. So I think that for us, we have to really, really try a little bit harder to do that. So for me, leadership's about driving an organization to results. It's about taking care of our people, obviously listening and communicating and setting a vision. So no matter what the channel is, these things remain the fundamentals of leadership, and being consistent. And so again, I keep saying it, but there are certainly challenges to the different channels and to not having our people around us. But we really have to, I think, keep those principles that I laid out to be forefront. So listening is harder, communicating is harder, but you have to do it anyway. In the early days of the pandemic, we focused a lot on saying, check in with your team. And pretty much all of our messaging to managers at this time was, don't be passive, check in with your team. Don't wait to hear from them. Because this is new, we're working remotely. Are you okay? And before you'd see when people weren't okay, or you'd see if something was up, and you'd be able to see that interactivity with people. So it really just, to me, all of the same principles of leadership were the same. The challenges of achieving it was different. But I think, again, it's that old thing about challenge and opportunity. These challenges led to other opportunities for us to exercise our leadership. And I saw that in a lot of ways. I was hearing examples from managers and staff across the organization, a manager that would say, every day I start my day with a check-in with my team. And, obviously this works well in a small team of people, but no matter what level you do that at, that's really important. Within my team, I said it's 300 people. Obviously, I don't connect with 300 people very often, but I certainly connect with them individually and in groups, through their managers, through their directors, the surveys are a little bit more passive, but obviously I pay attention to what I hear, and I try really hard, and I maybe have to be more conscious in trying to show that leadership that I think normally is fairly natural in my natural habitat and environment of the workplace where people are around me, and it's just second nature. So
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tom. I think you're absolutely right, especially, being in human resources, clearly for us, the human element, the connection piece is so important. And I think it ties in very, very well to leadership. I mean, it's a key trait that if we're not having that interconnection, that dialogue, then, we're really not growing and we're not moving forward, not only as a profession, but as colleagues and work cohorts. So I think you hit it right on in terms of demonstrating that leadership. And it's nice that in HR, we've got that trait, if you will,
yeah,
to make sure we're
progressing. To conclude on that question, on that point, that as HR professionals, we have, and we're also leaders within our own teams. We're helping to equip managers and leaders in the organization. We were putting out guidance to managers, and so you just have to, I think, just try a little harder to do it, and keep in mind our purpose as HR professionals as well, and it all comes together, I think, in that way. Yeah.
True. Yeah. Well, Tom, I have one last question, perhaps, and a lot has happened this past year from during this pandemic. The spotlight being shown on racial inequalities, to living and working in relative isolation, clearly, which has led many, towards mental illness, and has shown a spotlight on, to what degree Canadians are suffering. And of course, with the work from home, people being isolated, not being able to see individuals has made it really, really difficult. Can you share some examples of what that's been like for you and your team? Have you been able to cope with it? Have you seen a higher incidence of depression or dealing with the isolation, and how have you managed through that?
That's a really very, very pertinent question at this time. I mean, I'd certainly say that at the beginning, 15 months ago, I was worried about certain people, and my directors were, certainly reaching out to certain employees where we saw that they were struggling. I can think of a number of individuals who really, really struggled at the beginning. As the head of HR, of course, I'm responsible for that programming as well. We have mental health support. We have employee assistance. We have, a number of our HR practitioners who support managers and employees throughout that. I was very proud of the team for the work that they did to really help managers help their employees, give employees a forum for, to reach out if their manager wasn't doing it proactively. Everybody had a place to go. So as a workforce, I can say I felt really good about the measures that we put in place, the services that we were already offering, and how we adapted those to better support people. As things went along, I think what was interesting to note was people really did respond pretty well to working remotely. Not to say that everybody loved it, and the isolation was certainly a factor we heard. But as the technology really, and I didn't mention this, the technology improved pretty quickly for us. I don't think it did for everybody in every industry or sector, or even every federal government department. But we were up and running on MS Teams really, really quickly, and people embraced that technology. At the beginning, people weren't always turning on their camera, but it was audio. Now, almost every meeting, you've got all the tiles on the screen, just like the Zoom meetings that we see so much in other industry. So I've really seen that, and I will say, here's my reflection on this, mainly, Tony, why I think that people adapted so well is that I'm hearing now most people, I'm going to say most, a large part of my workforce are happy to work from home and would like to continue doing so. So I think we need to help them feel or see the relevance of being in the workplace as well. You hear from a lot of people saying, this is working great. My job is, I'm doing my job. My productivity is not suffering. I have better balance between work and personal life. And so, and not everybody's the same. Personally, I have been in the office more than I've been at home. And when I'm at home, I don't love it. So everybody's experience is different. I'm not imposing my experience on everybody. Like every employer, I have to work within the framework of my employer. My deputy head has been in the office pretty much every day since this began, and likes to have people around. And I like to have people around. For the most part, I haven't had a lot of people around on my floor outside my office. But I think we need to get to that right balance. I think we need to respect, how everybody feels about it, but recognize as well it's not everybody's choice. It's not my choice to work from home when I was required to do so. it's my choice. It was my choice to come in, even though I wasn't required to. But the choice will end when the pandemic truly, and I was to say truly ends, but when the measures change to the point where we'll be expecting more people in the workplace. I think we'll have to really work that out and find that right balance. And I think we can, and I think we will. And I think it's going to make for a healthier, happier workforce. But the bottom line is, to your question, certainly were mental health impacts, certainly fewer than I would have thought. And people showed themselves to be really quite resilient, largely, of course, due to technology, due to the fact that this was, a global pandemic. This wasn't just something we were living here. And so at the end of the day, we're going to be in a different world after this than we were before. And that's probably a good thing. There was, virtually nothing good about the pandemic, but certainly we can say that when we come out of it, and we can integrate some of the good things that we put in place during the pandemic, whether it was technology, connectivity in different ways, the different channels, we'll be hopefully in a better place than we were before this began.
I concur, Tom. I think if anything, with respect to anything good out of the pandemic, is that we've had a huge paradigm shift so quickly to using digital technology to really enhance our productivity and be able to work smarter and better and more efficient. But I just want to maybe highlight a recent survey that was just completed by the World Federation of People Management on creating people advantage, and it really focused on a global survey that was done by HR professionals that spoke to the fact that, if anything, this pandemic has really focused employers to be more employee-centric, meaning understanding the needs of employees and what those needs are, albeit they're very different. As you say, some would rather continue to work from home, others would like to be seen and go to the office, but more importantly, get an understanding of what impacts them, whereas employers in the past perhaps didn't have that front and center, but clearly that's now become more and more of a requirement, especially if you want to have solid teams and, teams, when I say teams, organizations, people that are really as productive as can be to hit the organization's objectives and goals. So that was a recent study that confirmed those findings. But Tom, thank you so very much for joining me today and joining us, our HR colleagues nationally, because this will be seen by our national members. It's really appreciated to hear your insights on what you do every day and your team and what your department does. So thank you again, and stay safe, stay well, and it's been a real pleasure having you on. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having me.